Hi, everybody. So nice to see everybody.
Hi.
I see a couple of familiar names, actually. Nice to see you, Kathleen. I recognize you. And I saw Aubrey, you're here. Nice to see you. So that's really great to see some familiar faces or just names. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So for this first session, I wanted to talk about this particular question. And as we get started and as we go through this session, there are a ton of us here, which is fantastic. It does mean that we probably won't be able to invite other people to jump on the mic at this time. So if you do have any comments, any questions, just go ahead and use the chat feature. I will try to keep up with the chat as we go and answer your questions as they come. So feel free to just ask them if you have them as we're going forward. And Lizzie and James are here too. So if it's something sort of logistics related, I'm sure they can jump in and help before I can. I know there's that raise hand feature as well, which is awesome, except again, if you can't jump on the mic, it doesn't really make any sense. So no need to raise your hand. If you have a question, just go ahead and type it into the chat and we'll get to it. Okay, so this particular question, I'm sure as teachers, many of us have heard this question from students. Maybe some of us have even asked this question of our students. So let's talk a little bit about this question. What does this word mean, or what does XYZ mean? So first of all, we'll take a look at this question from the student's perspective. So if the students are asking this, we'll talk about when teachers may ask this question. Even sometimes you may have come across course books asking this question, exercises where the students are asked to look at the meanings of the highlighted words, or look at the highlighted words and figure out the meanings, right? So what do we do with that? And so after all of this, we'll talk a little bit about some strategies for dealing with this. How do we help our students determine the meaning of an unknown word in a reading lesson specifically? So when dealing with texts. All right, and I'll be asking you some questions as we go forward, so feel free to answer in the chat if you would like to participate. All right, so when students ask this question, what does this word mean? Why do you think I might say this? Why is it not a good idea, do you think, to not invite this question? So what I mean by this is, why not ask students, were there any words that you didn't understand in the text? Hi, Aubrey.
They might be scared to speak up.
Okay. Yep. Someone's saying, Martin says they'll keep quiet. Ellie says, it depends on the aim of the text. Okay, right. So if this is a reading lesson, what is the aim of working with the text? That's a great point. What do we think? Go ahead and type into the chat. So if this is a reading lesson, don't overthink it. The main aim of the lesson or of this exercise is reading comprehension, right? Not necessarily vocabulary. Yes, and as some people are saying, the words might change depending on the context, right? We don't know exactly what the word means if there's no context. So we don't want to ask this question necessarily, because if I, let's say, have the students read a text in class, we've done the reading exercises, and then I think it's nice, right? As a teacher, the intention is good at the core of it to ask the students, okay, now, were there any words you don't understand? Let me help you. But I think it can go two different ways here. First of all, students may ask about 0 words. As some of you have said, they might all be silent. They might be shy to speak up. But then the other extreme is the students are now invited to ask about every single word in the text, which is going to take forever. And no matter how comfortable you are clarifying language on the spot, that's signing up for a lot, right? To feel confident, giving a clear, concise, useful definition, checking the meaning with CCQs for potentially every word in the text. Plus, that's going to take forever. So better not to ask this question at all. And you would be surprised that if you don't actually ask students to ask you about unknown words, you would be surprised how little they're distracted by words in the text, as long as you've structured the reading lesson effectively. So what I mean by that is having clear reading tasks set before the students read the text that aren't focused on vocabulary, but are focused on comprehension. So for example, you could have the students read the text quickly and choose the best title for the text, right? Like a gist task. You could have the students read again and answer a set of questions about the text. So if you've directed the students' focus somewhere else on reading comprehension, they have clear tasks to help them with reading comprehension, you would be surprised at how unbothered they are by the unknown words, as long as you don't make a big deal about them and you've given them a different, clear reading comprehension goal. Okay, that being said, what if they need to know some of the words that they don't know in order to do these tasks that you've set? What can you do if you're concerned that they won't know this word and they're going to need this word in order to answer these questions? Any ideas?
You could pre-teach it.
Awesome. Yes. Very good. Yeah. And there's 2 good answers in the chat. Yep. Pre-teach, and Patrick says predict blocking words. Good. So that does involve some prediction and some preparation on your part. You could pull out the words that you think are blocking and do like a pre-teach exercise using those words. How do we define a blocking word? Is any word in the text that the students don't know a blocking word? What does a word have to be in order to be considered blocking in a reading lesson? Okay, giving a synonym, as somebody said, is a good way to pre-teach. Yep. Yes. Okay, so 2 things. Someone said a word that may be above their current level. Good. And I think this is a team effort here. Ashima said anything that hampers comprehension, or, yep, as Angela said, is salient to the text. Good. So 2 things. First of all, a word that students won't understand, and a word that students need to understand or need to know in order to do whatever reading tasks you have set. And remember, as the teacher, you're in control of the reading tasks. So that's kind of up to you to figure out how challenging or how easy you want those tasks to be, and which words in the text students will need to know in order to do those tasks. So if you do feel that there are blocking words, you can do a vocabulary pre-teach stage, as many of you have said, by selecting or predicting some of the challenging or blocking vocabulary in advance and creating some kind of student-centered task, like a matching exercise with words and definitions, where the students can work through that first, and then those words will no longer be blocking or obstacles when they go back and do the reading exercises. So this does take a little bit of planning, as you can see, and additional preparation, but this is one very basic, easy way to help students deal with unknown vocabulary in a text, in a reading lesson. All right. Obviously, you can't pre-teach every single word that you think the students might not know. So what you can do, in addition to your pre-teach words, if you're worried that the students might ask about additional words, you can still prepare for that. Even if you don't include all, 20 words on your pre-teach exercise, you could include 6 words or 5 words in the pre-teach, and then prepare really nice definitions for a few others. So just in case the students ask, you have a clear definition ready, and you could prepare some CCQs or concept checking questions to help you clarify the words afterwards. So if you have a situation when a student asks about the word on the spot, it wasn't part of the pre-teach, maybe it's not necessarily blocking, but the student asked, you don't want to just ignore that poor student. You could have, hopefully, if you've anticipated, as Miriam said in the chat, if you've anticipated that this might be problematic, then you'll have a nice, efficient definition prepared. And you can even then use a CCQ that you've prepared just to check that the student really does get it before you move on. That's a really nice, quick way to deal with vocabulary that comes up kind of spontaneously. So your choice in that moment is whether you do that, do you just give the quick definition and confirm quickly with the CCQ that the student has understood, or do you take a bit more time and delve into really helping the student kind of figure it out on their own? I'm curious what you think about this. How would you choose one or the other? Like, how do you choose sort of how much detail to go into, or how sort of deep to go into strategies for figuring out the meaning, right? Like, what do you think it means? Or do you just tell the student the meaning and move on? Any thoughts on how you might choose one or the other? Yes, I think that's a great point by Nancy. Depending on how much time you have and probably depending on how many students you have. Yep, awesome. That's what Katrina just said too. So if you have, I would say this is a one-to-one lesson, like you just have one student or a couple of students and you can tell that they're all curious about that word, then you might take a bit more time and really use this as kind of a learning and training opportunity where you can sort of start at this point to guide the student through a process for figuring out the meaning on their own. You know, what part of speech do you think it is? Look at the context. Do you see any other clues? Sort of that type of thing. If you have a lot of students and this is one particular student asking, you don't have a lot of time allotted for this activity, then I think it's totally fine just to give a quick definition, ask a quick CCQ to check, and then move on. And I like this idea from Miriam, keep it at the end. Yeah, I think that's a nice strategy as well. You could keep a list of vocabulary that comes up like in the corner of the board and then address it at the end, or even prepare some sort of review activity on those words for the next lesson. Okay, how about when the teacher asks this question? Cherry made a good point. You can also watch expressions and reactions. Yeah, so see, kind of gauge how the students are feeling and decide how you want to deal with that in the moment. So what do we think? When teachers ask this question, what does this word mean? Here is my short answer for when or why. Exactly, Aubrey. My point here is they shouldn't. Yeah, not a good idea, as you're all saying in the chat. So why is this not a good idea? Why do I, as the teacher, not ask students, what does XYZ mean? Whether it's in the text or whether it's just a new word that's coming up. What's bad about this?
It puts
definitely. Mm-hmm. Good. Any other ideas? Yeah, Cherry said it could be too open-ended. We mentioned earlier that a lot of words have completely different meanings or many meanings. So if there's no context, the students don't know which meaning you're asking for. Good. It's also a lot harder to give a really nice definition. As many of us know from teaching, no matter how proficient you are in English, it's not easy to give a great definition for something on the spot. It's much easier to have someone else give you the meaning and then you just supply the word. So that's a much better way to go about this. So instead of asking students, what does blah, blah, blah mean? You can give the meaning somehow. Maybe you show a picture if it's something very concrete and ask, what do we call this in English? Or maybe you give a definition or a description. Like in English, what color would we say? If someone's feeling sad, we say they're feeling what? What color do we say? So this is a really nice way to give the same effect in the lesson. You're still teaching a word. You're still dealing with a word. Yes, and you're correct. It's blue, Ashima. We're still getting the vocabulary out there, but it's much easier to create that connection in our students' brains. They know exactly what the word is that you want. They might just not know it in English, right? And then all we have to do is attach the English word to it. So that's one way. If it's already in the text, then we can create, as we said before, some kind of student-centered task, like a matching task, which is much more student-centered. So the students can see the words and the definitions or the pictures or whatever it is at the same time and match them and figure it out that way using the text to help them. Finally, just like before with not inviting these types of questions, if this is a reading lesson and your aim in a particular activity is to help students with reading comprehension, then there's really no need to bring up unknown vocabulary words that the students don't need to do the reading exercises and that they're not asking about. Why draw their attention to vocabulary if that's not the aim of that particular lesson or activity? In fact, it's helpful to sort of show students that they can understand a lot of a text without knowing every single word, right? That it's okay not to have an exact definition for every single word in a text. They can still get a lot of meaning out of the text as a whole. So I'd say if it's not important to the actual tasks and the students aren't bringing it up, you don't need to bring those words up either, unless you want to move on and do a whole separate vocabulary focus, in which case there should be a structured exercise. Okay, so finally, let's think about when course books have activities like this. I know this text itself is too small to read, but you can at least tell that there are some highlighted words throughout this text. And then the course book has this exercise that asks the students to look at these words and then with a partner, just try to figure out the meanings. Okay, it's student-centered and that the students are doing something. Is there a way we could give the students a bit more support or a bit more structure than just throwing them into a breakout room and telling them to figure it out? Any ideas? Okay, nice. Yeah, multiple choice, potential, or true or false. Good. So some kind of student-centered task is going to give this a lot more structure. So now it's still the students figuring it out, but they have some options. It's not just anything, right? It's something a bit more concrete. Those are great ideas. We can also ignore a task like this. Again, if this is a reading lesson, if you have limited time, that's your decision, whether you want to even bring in a vocabulary focus or whether you want to save this for a different lesson. Finally, if you do want the students to just figure out the meanings from context, I think that is a really valuable exercise, but they need some training, right? That's not something that just happens magically most of the time. That's something that we can actually teach our students some strategies for to help them do this. So more than just try to figure it out. All right, so thoughts without a matching task or true or false or anything at this point. What if we don't have a student-centered task? What are some ways we could take these highlighted words and try to help the students figure them out? If you were to try to figure out a word in a text that you didn't know, what strategies would you use? What would you look at? Okay, great. Visuals and pictures, yes, although we don't actually have any pictures here in this text. So if we're only using the text, yes, great. Kathleen says parts of speech, and Micah kind of saying the same thing. Ask if it's an action or description, right? So is it a verb? Is it an adjective? Is it a noun? Yeah, nice, Aubrey. Similarities to other words, like synonyms, antonyms. Exactly. Yep, that's a great example. Billionaire versus maybe they know millionaire. So billionaire could be something similar. Context. Yes, totally. Okay, good. So we can help them by drawing their attention to a lot of different things about the word or about the text as a whole. So as many of you said, we can ask them to think about what's the part of speech. That's a really good place to start. We can try to help the students recognize maybe parts of the word. Maybe they know a prefix or a suffix, like maybe they know low, but not low paying, or sales, but they have never seen salesman. They can look for other forms of the word. Maybe the word appears later in the text, but in a different form. Surrounding words, as we've said, synonyms, antonyms, the words around it, the context as a whole. So if we know that the whole text is about success and about making money, does it make sense that some of these words would be about money, jobs, success, lack of success, right? So they can sort of see if it fits into the context overall. And then finally, if the student comes up with a guess what they think the word means, you can invite them to, on their own, substitute in a similar word or the meaning that they think, and then read the sentence or the paragraph again and see if it makes sense with the rest of the sentences around it. So these are the kinds of strategies that we can teach students in our classes. Rather than just kind of turning them loose and saying, good luck, right? Figure it out. We can give them some help by showing them strategies like this. So this is just an idea of an exercise that you could try if this is something you want to work on with your students. This is from a lesson that I taught quite a long time ago, but I actually it was a business English class that was fairly advanced, but I adapted an article, and as you can see, I just took out some of the key words and replaced them with nonsense words. So I told the students that they weren't real words. We don't want the students walking around thinking that they're learning this great new vocabulary that doesn't exist. But this was useful because it allowed me as the teacher to have total control over which words I wanted the students to figure out, right? So for just the purpose of an exercise, it was really helpful to get the students to they knew that the words weren't real, right? So there wasn't a real word they were trying to figure out. They were trying to figure out just the real meaning, right? Without being distracted by what the actual word was that they may or may not know already. So at this point, you could give them just the strategies and tell them that these are not real words, but they can still figure out what they mean. And here's where we can take some of those great ideas that we had, like the part of speech, right? The context, the surrounding words, all that stuff. And it's helpful if you can to give the students a nice kind of acronym or fun way to remember the different strategies so they can kind of go through the words process, right? So look at the word itself, look at the other words around it, look at the rest of the text. Does it make sense with the theme of the text? Look at the direction of the text. Is there a contrast here? Do you see a comparison? Because that might give you clues for synonyms or antonyms. And then substitute your guess and try it out. See if it makes sense. So if we give the students some easy to remember strategies, then they can go back to the text and do that as a practice exercise. So this could be done individually. Students could check their answers in pairs, right? Talk through these together, talk about how they use the strategies, how they use the words. So now we're teaching some really good tools that help promote learner autonomy. So we're actually giving the students tools that are going to make them better at dealing with vocabulary on their own rather than being totally dependent on just asking the teacher. All right, so after that, of course, we would do some feedback, right? See how the students did, give them some additional guidance if necessary, reflect on which strategies worked, how did you figure out the meaning, what helped you? And I think that you can show the students that even if they didn't get the exact word, like here, this was study that I took out, but if they chose survey, right, is that different, or if they said instead of prodded, which was increased, what if they said grew? Does it matter, right? Like the exact word itself is often not important for the purposes of reading comprehension. What's important is that they're able to get the meaning enough that they can keep going without getting stuck. So then the students could go back to the actual text with the actual words and use those same strategies. So these are helpful because, again, it's very student-centered. And not only is it something that the students get to do in class, but it's going to help them become more autonomous, independent learners. So they can use these strategies every time they do a reading exercise in class. They can also use these strategies every time they do a reading exercise outside of class, even, and feel empowered that if I don't know this word, I can figure it out, right? I have some strategies here that I can use anytime I need to without having to stop and look it up. And without having to ask the teacher, who isn't always going to be there. All right. This is bringing me to the end of my particular portion. Questions, comments, anything that jumps out at you before we move on? All right. Thanks, everybody. Just as a note, if you want further resources, I have a website called TEFLHorizons.com. There's a ton of great teaching resources, free training. I do webinars pretty frequently, podcasts, things like that. Lizzie's going to talk about Delta. There's a lot of great resources for pre and post CELTA and Delta. So if you're looking to take a CELTA or Delta course, definitely check out TEFL Horizons because you can find a lot of helpful prep that's going to make CELTA go even better. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.